I am one of the lucky few people who found their way into their dream job and their dream lifestyle without going to college. Can you do that too? Should you be going to university? Time to think like an investor. Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Josh, and in today's video I want to talk about a topic that I've had kind of a different flow of opinions on over the course of my life, and it always evolves and it changes. But I think the place where this started for me as someone who, it's odd how these things all kind of come together, but when I was a young person, there was someone in my close family, actually it was kind of like a distant family member, so it wasn't my close family actually whatsoever, but I had like a great uncle who was a very wealthy person, and when, my young mind, I thought, wow, okay, it appears that this person, this guy, kind of has it all. There's enough money, he kind of has his own business, he has multiple properties, there isn't much he can't do. And when I would go into, let's say Walmart, like you may have done as a kid, shopping with your parents or whatever it might have been, I see a Lamborghini Hot Wheel and I'm like, I want that, can I get that? And my mom or dad would be like,
well, no, that costs money, you have to work for that.
I was like, okay, well, what do I have to do to work for that? How do I make the necessary money so I can have this thing that I want? And it became to me over time natural that I thought that the main pursuit of somebody's life should be to try to maximize their money and their career, because if you can kind of get those two things taken care of, the rest of life takes care of itself. I mean, your relationships are probably less stressful, and you can travel and you can take vacations and you don't have to be stuck in a job. And I thought, this makes sense. Everybody thus should probably has the same goal, and their goal is to maximize their finances and their wealth and their lifestyle when it comes to their career and their income. That's where my head was at, and I graduated high school thinking that same thing. All of us here in this class are competing to see who can have the best lifestyle and the most amount of money, etc. And this led me to kind of isolate myself when it came to talking about conversations around college and university. And for me, it was weird, like going through high school. I went to a high school where almost everybody goes to university afterwards, and I remember the principal of the school came up to me and wanted to actually give me a business scholarship, but I told him, hey, no, I'm not going to be going to university because I want to try things on my own. And he looked at me in shock and awe and kind of stumbled over his words and said,
okay, that's weird. We didn't expect this from you. We thought as our student body president you would go on to a university and all this sort of thing.
And then they retracted that scholarship and gave it to somebody else. And it was just such an odd experience because I, like I said, isolated myself from my friends and social circles, and I almost became condescending because I was so, don't go to university, it's a terrible idea, it's a waste of money, if you want to be successful, you really don't need it. Like, I had this whole dialogue in my mind because I thought, through what I had been reading and learning, and I had been diving into the world of business and investing and all sorts of different influences I was reading, let's say Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or The Wealthy Barbell, these books that all these personal finance people read and write, they talk about, well, going to school, getting education, sure, that's important, but it's really not going to play any role in whether you become a wealthy person or not. And I internalized that, and that was the dialogue I had. And back when we had like Facebook rants and when you would post something to your status or your timeline, I used to like write about university and piss all these people off, and people would comment and say,
hey man, you need to shut up because we're in university and you're not holier than us.
And all that kind of thing. That's where I was at. And over time, I've kind of come to realize, okay, maybe not everybody is like me. Take someone like my older brother, for instance, who might be watching this. I hope he isn't, but he's the kind of person who was born in the same household, around the same influences, went to the same schools, and just has very little interest in money. It's just not something that really excites him. He doesn't have this ambition for massive career success. He values things like community and family and principles, and he's just this salt of the earth guy that goes to like volunteer in India and Africa to like build water filters because he's an engineer. These are the sorts of things where there are different values for him than there are for me. And I had just assumed that everybody's values were the same. So I thought, oh, my idiot older brother, he's going to become an engineer. He's going to be stuck in a 9-to-5 building stuff. But little did I know, like I said, people have things that drive them in different ways. And I had always thought, don't go to university. It's a waste of money, because if you want to become financially successful, you need to get into the workforce and start investing. And that is true. But not everybody values financial freedom or that lifestyle that I talk about like I do. But I think because you're here watching this video, I think you're probably more in tune with the way I see things, because you're going out of your way to stop it on this YouTube video and try to learn more about financial independence and make big life decisions. Should I go to university? Is that a good investment? So today, I still believe there is a large subsection of our society that should really rethink going to university. And I kind of want to talk through, now that I've been through these phases of being condescending towards it and also becoming a little more empathetic towards it and seeing how people have turned out and people's opinions coming out of university, seeing people with different value structures. How do I think about it now? Who is university right for and who is it wrong for? And ultimately, can you do what I did, which was kind of create my ideal career in life without going at all? The first thing I really need to talk about is the biggest myths you hear all the time, because you try to make this argument against university like, well, yeah, I don't want to go into debt, but at the same time, it's worth it because I get the education and I get to build a network and I get to have the experience, and not to mention the parties, like that's a blast, right? Think of all the people I'll meet. But here's the thing, that's complete falsehood. That's a lie. That is a complete myth. And the reason is because those are things that you can do without going to university. And you might say, well, it's enhanced by the university experience. It's like, not really, because if you just got yourself into the workforce, bang, from day one, you are now networking. There are 20 coworkers that you now have if you decide to work instead of going to school, and you are networking with them. And they might introduce you to other people. And as you interact with other businesses and other people, your network grows through that. And you can meet all sorts of other people outside of the classroom, right? That's the whole thing about networking. I never really understood that, because why do you want to be networking with a bunch of people who are in university being there to network when you could learn from people and network with people who are already in an industry that might be able to open a door or provide opportunities later on? So the networking thing, that never really sold me. And then there's this whole thing about the experience. Well, do you really want to go into debt for an experience? I mean, that's really what personal finance talks about all the time. Don't use debt for experiences. Only use debt for productive assets like buying a house or investing or building a business, right? And then there's the whole thing about education. And this is what stuns me, because I remember I used to go into what would be our provincial or state university here in my local town. It's like our biggest university. And there were a few classes that I was pretty intrigued by, like behavioral economics or these certain things. And I just walked into the classroom. I wasn't in university. I just walked right in, just watched the lectures, borrowed someone's textbook, and I learned from the classrooms the things that they were teaching there. Like I just walked in with some friends and no one ever batted an eye. And they didn't have any checks and balances to see if random people weren't coming into the classroom. And what that told me is that university, this whole experience, this college experience isn't about learning, it's about a systemized credential system, right? What you're doing at the end of the day is you're putting your money towards a credential, because if it was for the learning, they would lock down the classrooms and make sure that no one got in unless they were paying for that value. The value is not in the education. The value is in, let's create a system of different programs so we can reward them with a credential at the end after they've paid X amount of dollars, and then maybe that might get them into some sort of career that they want to be in. Now, I just don't think that makes any sense, because if you really want to do learning, you want to learn something real, you can go to the library and read the 10 greatest books from history and come out way smarter than you would from a history course at university. Same thing goes for finance, same thing goes for investing, same thing goes for computer programming. Whatever domain that you want to be in, you can way more productively self-learn online with the tools that we have. It kind of dispels the whole myth that you're really in university to learn. Here is the largest myth that I see over and over, which is that, okay, people who go to university actually end up earning more money. Well, if you went to university and took a statistics course, you'd know that that's called sample bias. You can't just compare people from university and compare people who didn't go to university, because there's a clear bias towards the motivation or the ambition of people who went to university versus the people who didn't. So you do all these studies and say, well, people who went to university earn X dollars more. They earn like $1 billion more over the course of their career. That's not exactly true, because what you're doing is you're measuring different ambition levels. What you need to do is take a group of people who wanted to go to university, but you take them out of it, and people who did go to university and wanted to go, and see where they end up. And I argue that they end up in the same place. That's my take, is that you have that sample bias. But I want to run us through a scenario anyways. Even with that bias in place, do you actually end up financially ahead if you go to university, as opposed to maybe saving that money investing it for a longer period of time and getting into the workforce right away. Here's the thing that is also massively overblown, which is this whole idea, and it's in the statistics, it's everywhere, talking about how people who graduate with a bachelor's degree make so much more money. They make like $1 billion more than someone who just graduated with a high school diploma. Well, I want to actually blow your mind a little bit with a scenario that is actually very unbiased and fair, and I'll even attach some of the data here so you can see it, but we're going to take an example of 3 characters. We have Graham, Kevin, and Andre, okay? These 3 people are all in a position maybe kind of like you, trying to decide, should I go to university? Should I take on debt? Should I just, have this paid for? Should I go into the workforce right away and start investing? What's the best option for me? And here's the thing we need to know, is we need to understand how much is university going to cost and how much more might we make by going and what's the interest rate we're going to have to pay on the debt. But here's what I'm going to say. Let's take Kevin decides, you know what, I'm not going to school. School is stupid. I don't really like it. I can make my way on my own. And what that means is that he is not going to make as large of a salary. In fact, with a high school diploma, he is only going to make $37,000 per year, as opposed to the $61,000 he might have made on average if he graduated with a bachelor's degree. Now, Kevin decides, okay, I'm not going to do that, but what I am going to do is I'm going to get into the workforce right away from age 18, and I'm going to start investing all of that money I would have put away towards university. We'll call it $10,000 a year, and I believe that's even pretty cheap. That's giving him the benefit of the doubt by American standards. I believe tuition's actually quite a bit more than that. So Kevin starts to invest this $10,000 until age 22 when his friends graduate, and then he invests 10% of his income forever until age 65 when he decides to retire. Okay, that's scenario 1. Then we have Andre, and Andre decides,
you know what, I've been pretty good in school, I've got this whole thing with the magic passion, but it's really not panning out very well, I'm not that great at it. What I need to do is go and get a degree, so I have some form of assurance that my career can go the way I want it.
But here's the nice thing, he's going to graduate and make an average income of $61,000, much more than Kevin, but he's going to rack up the average American student loan debt by the time he graduates of $37,000, and he's going to have to pay 5% interest on that, which is the average interest rate for American student debt. Now, let's say he's going to put 10% of his income away every single year until that's paid off, and then once that's paid off, he's going to begin investing that 10% of his income all the way until 65. And lastly, we have Graham. And Graham has really rich parents, and he's had his life just paved for him. It's just very easy. Everything's very simple because he doesn't really have to think about this too much. His parents are just going to give him the money that he needs to go to university. So he won't have that student debt, but he will still have delayed the amount of time it took him to get into the workforce and the amount of time it would have taken him to start investing. So he's only going to start investing 10% of his income after he's graduated as well. Luckily, he won't have any student debt to pay down. So if we look at the numbers, and I've run this with financial planning software, okay? If we look at Kevin and Andre and Graham, the person who gets ahead the most by retirement, by far and away, is Kevin. Isn't that crazy? Even though he earned much less income than the other two, he actually ended up with more retirement assets because he didn't go into debt and he had more time to compound his earnings. You see, if you're investing, the amount of income you make, if you make $61,000 versus $37,000, if I have more years to save and more time to compound and less debt to pay off, I might end up way wealthier at retirement age or even throughout my whole life if I'm the person who decided to stay away from the debt and to start investing early and get those investments compounding. So the way this shakes out is actually Kevin ends up in first place, Graham ends up in second place because his debt was paid for, and unfortunately, just like in real life, Andre ends up in third place. All in all, Kevin ends up running for governor and he wins. So he didn't even have to go to university and now he's the governor of California, which is fantastic. And I believe it's great for him. He won this scenario all around. But all this being said, guys, it's not exactly so sure that by going to university, you're going to end up in a better financial position. I mean, it could mean that because of the sample bias, right? Typically more ambitious and smarter people are going to universities and they're deciding to manage their money different and invest differently. But if you're the kind of person who is ambitious and you're willing to go out on your own and you're willing to establish your own connections and go for coffee with random people and try to knock on doors to create opportunities, what I'm trying to say here is that we're told this myth that opportunity is created in university when that's just not true. All of the opportunity is created once you get into the workforce. There is so much that I would have never learned in university that I learned going into the workforce. When I decided to sell cars, I had to learn to negotiate. I was like an 18-year-old kid, and these people were coming up and just smacking me over the head with like their negotiation skills, and I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know how to leverage my connections. I didn't know how to start my own business. I didn't know anything about marketing or accounting or all of these sorts of things that I had to learn how to do and had to network and find the right people in order to do that. Those are all things that I gained by going into the workforce, and things that I probably would have had like a textbook level knowledge had I just graduated university, right? So I think my main takeaway is this: if you're ambitious and for you the highest value in your hierarchy of values in your life is to have financial success, and it's to have a freedom of your lifestyle, it's to not have a 9-to-5 job, you want freedom and you want this ability to have no limitations, university is structured to move you into a world of limitations. It's structured to move you into the 9-to-5. It's structured to move you into the corporate hierarchy. And that's fine. That is totally fine for a lot of people. But you have to understand that if you're someone who's more entrepreneurial, or you want to go into the wild, and this is where my perspective has changed. I used to think everybody should skip university. Now I think some people don't have the risk tolerance for this, right? I could make an analogy to investing. Going to university is like buying a 60-40 balanced portfolio of blue chip stocks and government bonds. It's gonna be very safe. The risk to reward makes sense. It's gonna be a little more expensive because you might not be as wealthy at the end. Whereas going out on your own, trying to establish your own connections, build your own business like I did, is like owning a portfolio of all small micro cap stocks. This thing is gonna be bumpy as hell. It's gonna bump around a lot. It's gonna be a very difficult process of bumping into different walls and falling flat on your face and losing money and wasting time, but you're going to end up having a much more wild ride that may have developed your character more and also might end up making you wealthier if that's what you're striving for anyways. So thank you so much for watching me rant on university. Again, I'm become more empathetic to people who choose to go and want to do that, but I still think that there's a lot more thought that needs to go in it from a financial perspective, from a skill development perspective, from a character development perspective. I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be gained from going straight into the workforce and starting to compound your investments, compound your wealth. So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video whatsoever, if you enjoyed any of the message here, if it helped you make a decision whatsoever, make sure to hit that like button below, support the channel by hitting subscribe, and turn on post notifications for more videos just like this one every single week. Until next time.